Hello and welcome. As the opening screen said, from the First United Methodist Church in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. In the background right now, I think you may hear a few kids. If you listen closely, as I look out the window from the library, I see the playground. And there are kids from the Mom's House daycare uh, who are playing out there right now. It's a great program, a group of people that offer free daycare to the children of single parents who are finishing up their education or continuing their education. And they do absolutely wonderful work with kids up to the age when they themselves enter school. The sermon this week is going to be short because we have a baptism in church. And in our tradition, we welcome children as infants into the fellowship of believers through baptism, welcomed by God and set among us one way or another. And the reason we do that is that, uh, for one thing, Jesus said, don't block the children from coming to me. The kingdom of heaven is made up of people like that, and that they are people. This is a mandarin orange. It's only about an inch and a half this way and an inch this way. It's not the size of a regular orange, but it is an orange. And a small human is still a human. All of us stand in need of God's grace. All of us can receive God's grace. And we do that in many different ways. It's going to be different from how a child and how an adult go about that, and very different from how someone between child and adult goes about that. But nonetheless, all human beings, whoever they are welcome in the kingdom of God and are made in God's image. And it is for every single one that Jesus came to renew our lives time and time again, day by day. We only have to be baptized once to recognize and to celebrate and to receive the seal of that promise. It doesn't mean that people who are not baptized are not open to receiving the grace of God and that God is just saying, okay, you yes, you no, you no, you haven't met the requirement, but if you do that, you'll get there. But it is a moment when God says, for sure, yes, of course. And it is a moment where we come together as a community, not as individuals, but as a community to recognize God's salvation for all of us and the responsibility that we take for one another. The local church, the local community, especially saying, here with this child, we will do all that we can to help this child recognize throughout life what God has done and is doing. And that takes many forms. Sunday school, uh, teaching the child about the Bible, about the things that Jesus taught all of us. Worship. Children should be there. I don't care if they make noise, they're there. If they squirm, well, their attention span is short. But then again, sometimes mine is too. Sometimes they fall asleep. And I have seen adults fall asleep in church Um, on very rare occasions, um, I've been known to do that myself, never while preaching. Next week, we're celebrating a baptism of a baby as well. And later in November, we have a couple elementary school students who are to be baptized, who are already part of our fellowship. But this is like saying, yeah, this is something that's going to be lifelong and beyond lifelong. In November, we celebrate what we call All Saints' Day, remembering what we call the communion of the saints, remembering that we are part of a people that has come before us, that we are now a part of, some of whom have gone before us into the fullness of God's presence, and by God's grace may welcome us there. And all of God's people are part of that, at whatever age, at whatever stage. It's not a matter of understanding things or having the proper words. If a human being is born who has limited uh, rational abilities, if their brain is not fully formed, or if there's brain damage of some sort, and they can't comprehend necessarily in the same way that an adult can, it doesn't matter. Throughout their life, they too are welcome to take part in all of the life of the community. They are part of it. In fact, sometimes it is good to have somebody like that around, reminding all of us that God's love is plain, God's love is simple, God's love is wide, God's love is patient and kind and understanding. All of these things come about. So here comes the sermon today, and I hope it's helpful to you. It's not about baptism, although the scripture reading does mention baptism, because Jesus talked about that in many terms. But the big thing is that we, all of God's people, one day will worship together in God's presence by the grace of Christ. And even if this video is a limited way of doing that, we welcome you into it. Let's have some music, and I'll see you on the other side of it. Today we hear from the 10th chapter of the Gospel according to Mark, verses 35 through 45. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to him and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And he said to them, "What is it you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit at your right hand and one at your left in your glory." But Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I'm baptized with?" They replied, "We are able." Then Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink, you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." When the 10 heard this, they began to be angry with James and John. So Jesus called them and said to them, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. But whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Between 1989 and 1991, when I lived in the U.S. Virgin Islands, my big getaway would be a day in Puerto Rico. And every so often I'd get on a plane early in the morning and fly over for the day, fly back on the last plane in the evening if I could. These were small, very small planes, commuter planes, the kind where, well, they were an adventure in and of itself. Let's leave it at that. But most days when I would get there for a sort of therapy day, it would be going to the mall. There are no malls in St. Croix. There was one mall in Puerto Rico, and could go there, hang around, and in the afternoon go see a movie, and then after supper head back home. But then there were other days when I was over there, which I loved, I really enjoyed, when I would just poke around Old San Juan for a little bit, or some other part of the island, but especially Old San Juan, and walk around the side streets. So one day I found myself outside the Cathedral of San Juan Bautista, St. John the Baptist. Begun in 1535, completed in 1802, updated a little bit during the 19th century, but nonetheless, a beautiful, beautiful old site. When I went in, one of the first things that I saw was the tomb of Ponce de Leon, the Spanish governor who led an expedition from Puerto Rico to Florida in order to find the Fountain of Youth. That's kind of an ironic spot when you think about it. The tomb of somebody who never found the Fountain of Youth. But the other thing that I found that day was ironic in its own way. and has something to do, I think, with what we heard from the Gospel of Mark. What I found was in a chapel off to the north side of the main altar. The word cathedral comes from a Latin word, cathedra, which means a seat. And the cathedral is the building where the bishop's seat is, kind of like we speak of a county seat. It's the official place, the official site of a bishop. And usually the cathedra is placed in the main sanctuary by the high altar, and the bishop generally will sit either behind it or off to the pulpit side. But this particular cathedral and this particular archbishop had been one of those centers and one of those figures of imperial colonial culture, the culture of the Spaniards in the Caribbean for centuries. And so, not in the main building, or the main nave rather, but in the side chapel off as you're facing it to the left, there was a physical sign of that entire religious and political system. Raised up on a platform to the right as you went in was a big, ornately carved chair with a red cushion, the cathedra. In front of it, there was a low stool with a matching pillow, and suspended in midair above it, suspended from the high ceiling by a yellow, I suppose, golden colored cord, was a cardinal's hat. One of those big, round, floppy red hats with wide brim that went out to about there. And it hung over that throne, that cathedra. Encircling the back of the hat, curving out from behind it, and draping to the floor on both sides behind the seat, was a bright red velvet cloth. This was in the age before there were security cameras everywhere. And it was a weekday morning. Nobody was around. What do you do? James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to Jesus and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And he said to them, "What is it you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your glory." That morning at that cathedral, I kind of understood what they were saying. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I get it. You see, it isn't often that anybody has access to just playing around with or trying out the trappings of that kind of power, that kind of prestige. It isn't that you actually have it, but just the appearance of it. There's a kind of human pride that it reaches out and well, people do things. Currently, that cathedral requires people to take an official and accompanied tour of the building if they're not there for worship. Worship, of course, anyone is always welcome, but you don't get as close to these things as once upon a time you might have done. My guess is that the tours and the tickets that go with them might help defray the cost of building maintenance, and that is a worthy worthy cause. Uh, in fact, if anybody watching this video wants to chip in on the maintenance of our building, that would be fine. You're welcome to do that. We won't say no. But things are different when you're standing right there, and that's not an issue. And when what you're looking at is a throne, it's easy to fall for the pomp and circumstance that you see on the surface and forget about, let's call it the discipleship that doesn't show up quite as readily, but is there long before a throne ever will be. Again, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward and said to Jesus, "Teacher, we want you to do whatever we ask of you." And Jesus said to them, "What is it you want me to do?" And they said, "Grant us to sit one at your right hand, one at your left hand in your glory." But Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I'm baptized with?" We see the throne. We don't see the other part. And we want to sit on those two extra thrones, just tiny, humble little thrones. Not Jesus' throne, but just the side thrones next to him. That's all. And he still comes back and asks us instead of sitting down, whether we can stand up, instead of putting our feet up, can we carry our crosses? No, not the big one. Not the big cross where he bears up under the sin and agony of the world, but our crosses, whatever they may be. Whether it's the simple, humble crosses of living a life centered first on God and then on his children, or some particular cross that is placed where we can carry it. You know, there's another tourist site in Old San Juan. It's called the Capilla del Cristo, the Chapel of the Christ. It was built in the mid 1700s on, well, right at the end of a street, a cobblestone street, beautiful place called Calle Cristo, the Street of Christ. In the 1700s, there was an annual horse race through town. And it ran down Calle Cristo, and right there it turned to follow the line of some cliffs that overlook the port. You can still stand in the park next to Capilla Cristo and look down and see the shoreline and see the boats that come in and out right there. It's a real sharp drop. And that is where this horse race turned a corner and then went up the top of the walls that lined the cliff. There was a man whose name was Baltasar Montanus, who was riding in that race. And as he took the turn, the horse took the turn too wide. And both Montanus and his mount went off the edge of that cliff. Miraculously, Montanus lived. The horse died, but somehow he survived the fall. And as I say, miraculously, people took it to be a miracle. And so, in gratitude for that miracle, but also in concern for others who might do the same thing at another time, his father paid for a little chapel to be built at the point where the accident had taken place so that nobody else would fall from there to their death. Jesus said to James and John and to the other disciples, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as the rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them." When you hear that, think about a church having a throne room and someone sitting on a throne above everybody else. Think of how seductive that can be. Jesus went on, "Their great ones are tyrants over them, but it is not so among you." Ouch. "But whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all." So now instead of thinking about a Christian as someone, a disciple high and lifted up, think about Montanus' father, who said, "How can I help? What can I do to protect others from the same fate that almost befell my son?" Jesus went on, "For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Montanus' father didn't give his life as a ransom, but he gave plenty of money as ransom. Well, maybe not ransom, but to save a few people by building a chapel right there at that spot so it wouldn't happen again. That's discipleship. In the many ways that we live our lives, there will always be ways to follow the one who gave his life, who left heaven for earth, who left the earth for a cross out of pure and total love for you and for me. day by day, whether we do some form of administration or office work, whether we run a tire garage or whether we run an imperial province, whether you run a McDonald's or just a cash register, whether we build stone walls and make fancy chairs and footstools, whether we deal with traffic safety and preventing accidents, whether we're crazy researchers, scientists looking for the fountain of youth, you name it. There are ways to do that that are good, that are not bound up with pride so much, that are not bound up with fame, that are not bound up with control, that are not bound up with a false sense of glory. And we can live our lives in ways that are lived the same way that Johann Sebastian Bach wrote his music. At the top of a new piece of paper, before he would begin to compose, before he would begin to set these incredible notes down on a staff of music, he would write the letters SDG, which is short for the Latin phrase Solo Dei Gloria, which means to God alone the glory. Amen.